Hello and welcome. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? Discussions about maybe Ukraine's involvement, and the Russians are increasingly afraid of a coming Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south. This and more in this Situation Report. There has been a prisoner exchange between the Russians and the Ukrainians. 130 Ukrainians were apparently exchanged for 90 Russian soldiers. Among the 130 Ukrainians were 87 that were defenders from Mariupol. 71 of those were the ones fighting in Azovstal. About the Nord Stream explosion, yesterday I did some breaking news when it came out. Now we have a little more informations. The New York Times has unverified informations that are with low confidence, so we shouldn't, as of now, they are far from being facts that are proven in any ways. US officials supposedly refuse to show them sources, to offer facts, to give them evidence. And the data leak that led the New York Times to write its article has low confidence according to this. In the article from the German journal Die Zeit, it's also being saying that while the official German prosecutors are doing investigations, there are no proof of that either. There are no public statements of the German government's institutions that they said we did this and this. At least until now, I could not find any press conference of the general prosecutor, for instance, even confirming what the news outlets have said. Again and again, we have to say there is no evidence being presented. Neither did the investigative authorities publish anything about it. In general, the story is that a small boat was chartered, and it started from the German harbor of Rostock. Small boat makes sense because I think it was 15 meters, under 15 meters. The boats don't need a transponder, so nobody would worry if he sees that boat there without a transponder. And a boat of that size should be big enough to carry 500 kilos of explosive plus 6 men. The boat itself was supposedly chartered by a company in Poland that is run by 2 Ukrainians, which is kind of too obvious as a sign, as a trace where it might have come from. And the 6 persons on board all had professionally forged passports, according to the German outlets. Generally, in the media reports, it explicitly says that false flag cannot be ruled out, even though there is no evidence that it was actually a false flag action. But at the same time, the professionalism of doing such a deep dive with explosives, of blowing it up and then not cleaning up the boat afterwards and leaving explosive residue, at the same time chartering the boat over a company that is run by Ukrainians, feels like it might be some false flags. In theory, Russia could have done it to point the suspicion towards Ukraine while blowing up Nord Stream 1 pipeline, if we want to believe the research that Alexander Oliver, for instance, has presented, which I introduced to you in the past, whereas the Nord Stream 1 was blown up by the Russians, but this is a whole new story. In total, we can say right now there is no evidence again. The wording of the German newspapers shows me that they are fairly confident that they are facing the facts. They are not really presenting it as a theory anymore. They are presenting it as a proper research that they have done, but unfortunately without any proof whatsoever from their side. So it seems like this group might have actually have done that, but there is no further evidence. Basically, it could still be anyone. Proof is we still have to wait for proof, and as of now, at least at the time of recording, I don't see any government entity having actually confirmed those stories. So, which would at least give us the confidence that the government is saying that, which, well, they lie too. But at least this would give us this hint that the government confirms it as authentic, which isn't done as of now. This was it about the pipeline. So I basically summarized the situation right now, and as of now, it's far from proven that it was the Ukrainians, even though it seems that the strongest the strongest hints, the strongest points, the strongest, not really evidence, but the most convincing story increasingly is pointing in this direction. But we also have to emphasize that as of now, there is no one in those medias is accusing the Ukrainian government yet. So far, there is no sign that it was confirmed by the government, that it was ordered by the government, even though the amount of explosives that have been used are not really easy to buy on the black market. So experts say that a government entity must have been involved to help out with the explosives for that. We will observe the development of the situation, but unfortunately, I can't really say much more. We have further, if we go to the eastern front north of the Siversky Donetsk, we have continued fighting along big parts of the front line, artillery shelling obviously, and there is a small gain close to Dibrova in this area here that is likely that the Russians might have actually gained some territory here, but in total we don't see much change of the territorial control here in general. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we have continued heavy pressure on Bakhmut. There's reports of a Ukrainian counterattack in the area of Ivaniske for several days. So several days there were reports. It must be several counterattacks that are going in this direction, obviously to secure the line of communication in the southwestern direction of Bereztok, to make sure the Ukrainian soldiers inside of the city can be kept supplied. Apart from that, I cannot confirm any additional territorial gains after the Ukrainian evacuation from the eastern side of the town, where they have evacuated over the Bakhmutivka River. Further south in Avdiivka, fighting is also heavily. There are a lot of attacks from Krasnohorivka, Vesele to Pervomaiske and the south here, Nevelske. In Vesele, apparently the Russians gained a foothold. They might be in control of the town now, so they have probably gained some ground there as well. Around Marinka, the Russians are also claiming successes both in Marinka as well as in the direction of Pobieda. I cannot fully confirm that yet, but it seems at least likely that they gained some ground in the direction of Pobieda. Around Vuhledar, there's continuous fighting, but it seems to be weaker than in the past weeks. And now Rybar and others are increasingly worried. We have Rybar here. They are increasingly worried that the Ukrainians are bringing in reinforcements and they are planning to conduct a counteroffensive in the areas southwest of the city. So southeast of the city, that's Rybar, one of the pro-Russian Telegram channels, being afraid of a Ukrainian counterattack in Vuhledar, where they would face exhausted and decimated Russian troops. On the southern front, the usual thing, fighting along the front line is mostly limited to artillery fire, but we have some reports here in the Russian Telegram. They are increasingly afraid of a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the direction of the Azov Sea. The timing for that supposedly is the end of March to early April. The different military bloggers are not in unison when it comes to the target. Some think they might go for Mariupol, some think they might go for Melitopol, but increasingly the pro-Russian military bloggers are getting more worried about a coming Ukrainian offensive. Other than that, there has been further fighting here along the Dnipro. We actually have a small video here of shelling in one of the islands that you can see here on the Dnipro River. Basically, we see artillery shells, and it was geolocated here to that point. So those areas are still being fought over. The Dnipro Islands are still contested, but that's more or less it when it comes to overall development. So nothing big happening. Artillery shelling on both sides, obviously, but no general movement of the front line. We have reports of increased fortification activity on the southern front, especially in the Zaporizhzhia region, which would be in perfect accordance to the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive. Generally, we have to say Prigozhin said that it shows us like the situation around Bakhmut. Prigozhin said that he has written a letter to the commander of the war, so likely Gerasimov, with an urgent, like he was begging for ammunition. But he said that the person handing over the letter, or supposedly handing over the letter, was refused entry to the headquarters, so he was not able to deliver said letter. Prigozhin is also saying the Ukrainians are building up offensive forces around Bakhmut that are now threatening his forces massively if they are not receiving ammunition and shells and reinforcements really soon. He says if those offensive forces are continuing to build up and then are attacking, that will threaten the blockade of Bakhmut, basically meaning that the forces here that cut down several lines of communication into the city, they will be in danger of being pushed back, of being destroyed if he doesn't receive reinforcements and additional ammunition. Zelensky at the same time emphasized and probably justified the continued defense of Bakhmut by saying that if the Russians are conquering Bakhmut, then it would open up the road to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, which is kind of true, but at the same time, there are strong fortifications already being built here along that line, so a big Russian breakthrough would not be expected. Generally, though, he officially, publicly said that the Salushny, the general, the chief of the general staff of the Ukrainians and the commander of the ground forces, both are in accordance with him, agree with him that Bakhmut the defense of Bakhmut should continue. When it comes to the mobilization, we have an interesting article here. According to that, a man turned to a psychiatrist because he felt like suicidal, and the psychiatrist said, why don't you go to the army? There your death would be of some use. Interesting conversations that I unfortunately obviously can't confirm. I have no way of checking the authenticity. Ukrainians are also saying the Russians are now starting to register 17-year-olds in Luhansk for military service already, indicating that the general mobilization that the so-called Luhansk People's Republic has called for since the beginning of the war might be extended to minors in the near future. Also, all over Russia, advertisements for the volunteer units are reappearing, which would be an indication that the Kremlin is actually not going for a second mobilization wave, because then obviously finding volunteers is not needed. This is being interpreted that Putin will have to wait it shows us that he's running out of personnel, so he needs fresh troops, and at the same time he doesn't want to do a second mobilization, because obviously then the advertisements for volunteers would not be needed. The speculations are, though, that he at the earliest could do it in early summer, a second mobilization wave, because on the 1st of April the next wave of conscripts, roughly 130,000, will be called up, and they will occupy the training grounds and thus leave no room for mobilized personnel to be trained up. But at the same time, I don't find any mentioning what is happening to the conscripts from the autumn cycle, which should be more or less trained to at least be of some use after, 5 months of training fairly soon. As of now, I have not heard of them being used in Ukraine. I have not found any evidence. If you did, please post it in the comment section. But it's 130,000 men, which in theory should be able to be deployed in Ukraine, because Russia has annexed the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, as well as Crimea. So according to Russian understanding, according to Russian law, this is actually Russia. So sending conscripts which are not allowed to be used in foreign wars, using them inside of Russia, according to Russian understanding, would be legal. It might be possible that the conscripts pop up in this region fairly soon, but we'll have to see if this is going to happen. I have at least as of now, I cannot confirm it yet. Other than that, we have have complaints here that the mobilized personnel is saying they are being issued weapons from the 1940s, but if we read it correctly, it's a little less drastic than we might imagine in the first case. They are not getting Mosin Nagant and Papa Shah submachine guns from World War II, but it seems to be including mortars and cannons. So I mean, in theory, it would open up the possibility of them getting rifles from World War II as well. But specifically mentioned here are mortars and cannons, which obviously in that age have lower range, lower accuracy and all of this, but still do damage, still are of some use if they are in stockage. It's a whole different story if you add the older artillery to a unit or even give every individual soldier an ancient weapon. In this regard, it's probably less dramatic than it sounds, but it also shows how deep the Russians are digging into their depots when it comes to usable equipment already. The Ukrainian resistance center is saying Kadyrov supposedly is actively recruiting fighters from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, so fighters that are already in their units. Kadyrov is trying to muster them, is trying to get them into his forces. At the same time, he supposedly is using the Kadyrovtsi, his units, only behind the front line in like policing missions, thus saving them while the rest of the Russian forces are suffering heavy losses. And according to the Ukrainian resistance center, this is starting to get the Kremlin to become nervous. Does that mean that Kadyrov is planning a coup? Highly unlikely. At least if I listen to Russia experts, they're saying Kadyrov would be without a chance. As a Muslim Chechen, he would never be allowed to take over. But in the past, there were some indications that he might be having an eye on a potential breakup of the Russian Federation. For instance, he was asking for air defense system to be stationed in Chechnya, and there is no reason to station air defense system there against Ukraine, as Chechnya is so far away from the front line that it's unthinkable that Ukrainian planes or missiles might arrive there. The idea was that he was asking for air defense systems to be able to take them over should Russia disassemble, but whether that's already meaning that he's giving up or preparing for a breakup of the Russian Federation is probably too early. Still, the Ukrainian Resistance Center, which is obviously biased, is saying that, and I can just try to put it in some context, but I can't really say more about that. When it comes to the political sphere, after the murder of a Ukrainian soldier, I talked about it in the last situation report where he was shot after saying Slava Ukraini. He's now becoming like a symbol of this war. You can find a lot of memes about him, a lot of paintings, pictures, etc. with his face. After he was murdered, the Ukrainian government also said they are investigating 171 cases of sexual crimes against Ukrainians. 39 of those were against men and 13 against children. Generally, Ukraine is investigating 2,651 cases of crimes against children committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine, and around 16,000 children are deported into Russia as of now already. The Ukrainian Presidential Commissioner for Human Rights, Daria Gerasimchuk, is also saying that children are generally being taken away from their parents with 5 different methods. The first method is the parents are being killed and the children thus being turned into orphans. The second one is the parents and the children are being separated during the so-called filtration. The third is they are taking away the parents' rights by basically declaring them unfit to take care of their children. The fourth is they are taking children away from children care homes like orphanages, hospitals and something like this to deport them into Russia. And the fifth is they create situations that make it unbearable for children to live there, and then they are offering the parents to give the children a chance to rehabilitate in a rehabilitation center inside of Russia. And if in some cases where the parents don't agree, they take away the children by force. That's at least what the Ukrainians are saying. We were talking on this channel a lot of times in the past about the attempts about the Russian deportation of children into Ukraine. The Levada Center, which is considered to be an independent, still an independent survey institute in Russia, it has published a new survey, and according to that, 51 of the persons asked were thinking badly about Russians that left Russia in the last year. Only 10% were thinking positively and showed understanding, and mostly older persons over 55 in smaller cities, smaller than 100,000, and in the countryside were thinking like this. So obviously those that still have a big connection to growing up in the Soviet Union. And finally, when it comes to international support, Ukraine has now received JDAM-ER. That's basically a winged version of the JDAM bomb. JDAM is a smart bomb kit for iron bombs that allows them to easily and cheaply being converted into precision bombs. With the JDAM-ER, that's a development from the United States and Australia. The JDAM can be have an extended range of roughly 80 kilometers, 45 miles. This is highly dependent on the flight altitude and the speed of the plane dropping them. So it will depend on where it can be used. Just adding 80 kilometers or 45 miles to the front line will unfortunately not cut it, as it would mean the Ukrainian planes have to fly 50 kilometers and higher directly over the front line, obviously exposing them to the vast array of Russian air defense systems and the Russian combat air patrols in that area. Realistically, it's probably that it's mostly used maybe roughly 20 kilometers behind the front line against bigger targets, because the JDAM-ER can have 2,000-pound bombs, 950 kilos, I think, more or less. So much heavier warhead than the regular HIMARS missiles. And in this regard, it can ideally, for instance, destroy bridges with far less hits. If it's combined with the AGM-88 HARM, the high-speed anti-radiation missile, which is also already in the Ukrainian inventory, they might actually be able to suppress the Russian air defense systems to allow them for a strike a little deeper into the territory. But it seems absolutely impossible for them to strike the Kerch Bridge with it, as the JDAM-ER doesn't have the range, and it would force the Ukrainians to fly their jets over the Azov Sea or even try to go through the Black Sea, for which they lack the range. And like any hope in this regard that this would help Ukraine destroying the Kerch Bridge does not seem to be justified, even though the bombs would probably be fairly well suited for that. Finally, I have two interesting videos that I do want to show you. So I need to turn it off in case they've turned on music. This is actually an armored train that is filmed in Ukraine, and the interesting part is how much the design of armored trains seems to have been perfected in the 20th century, because I see a lot of similarities to the historic armored trains that I know, for instance, from the Wehrmacht in the Second World War. We see in the beginning, we see a trailer that has building materials, so the crew on the train itself can repair the railroad track if it was blown up by a mine. At the same time, if there is a mine, the weight from this track will likely already detonate it right before the places where the personnel is. And also it will allow the train to actually discouple, I think is the word. So basically to separate this wagon from the rest of the train and give it a push to let it roll ahead of the armored train to blow up mines from a safe distance. This is a design that is well known from World War II. We see here it's basically the same again. We have a light anti-aircraft cannon. Also, we've seen that in World War II. That's a 23mm ZU-2. Still a fairly old design, but still very viable. Not really against fast-flying targets, but against ground targets, it will definitely do the job. The firepower from these cannons is pretty horrifying. And we see wagons that are armored to a certain degree, and we see the rifle ports where rifles are sticking out here. That seems like a photo op, and crew in its full gear. It looks like armored chassis as well, up armored train locomotive. We see the soldiers here, and here they are in the firing ports ready to fire out. So in some degree interesting that the Russians are still using it. As far as I know, they are the only nations actually still using armored trains, and they more or less keep the design that we know for 100 years or more now. And finally, we have some interesting thing here that's from the area of Crimea, where 5 Russian tanks were destroyed by artillery. And it is a stark reminder to us when we talk about the Western tanks that are being given to Ukraine, that the majority of the losses of tanks in this war is not by tank-on-tank fighting. So it's not that the Leopard 1 will most likely face T-90M and being all the time. Actually, that's a vast minority of the cases. Most of the cases, the tanks are being destroyed by artillery, and there even the most modern one, be it Leopard 2 or be it the M1 Abrams, are as much in danger as they are their older brethren, as the top armor of both is nowhere close to being strong enough to survive a full hit of a 152mm high explosive grenade shot by the Russian artillery. So this was it for now. If you enjoyed it, leave a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comment section. What do you think about the Nord Stream thing? Do you think the Ukrainians were it, or do you think it's some kind of false flag operation? Leave a comment. That also helps with the algorithm. And if you're new here, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And of course, this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. And thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. Without you, it wouldn't be possible. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.